want to talk about my father, the man who taught me how to shake hands, how to change a tire, how to look someone in the eye. And I want to talk about the woman I married 38 years ago, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone on earth. My father's name is Roy. He's 81 years old now, and he still wears a collared shirt every single day. Even in the hospital, even on the bad days. He says a man who stops caring about how he presents himself has already started giving up. That's the kind of man he is. My wife's name is Connie. We met at a church social in Baton Rouge in 1986. She had this laugh that could fill a room. I fell in love with that laugh before I even knew her last name. We built a good life. A house in Gulfport, Mississippi, 2 kids. Our son lives in Nashville now. Our daughter is up in Atlanta. I worked 31 years at a paper mill before I retired. Connie did bookkeeping for a dental practice downtown. We weren't rich, but we never wanted for anything that mattered. My father lived alone in a house outside Hattiesburg for 15 years after my mother passed, kept his own garden, drove himself to church every Sunday, called me every Thursday at 7 in the evening, without fail. He was one of those men who made independence look easy. Then he had the fall. It wasn't dramatic. He stepped off the back porch wrong one afternoon and went down hard, broke his hip. He had surgery at Forest General, and when they discharged him 3 weeks later, we all agreed he couldn't go back to that house alone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Connie was the one who suggested it. He should come here, she said. He's your father, Larry. We have the room. I told her she didn't have to offer. She said she meant it, and the way she said it, I believed her. So my father came to live with us in October. The first few weeks were fine. Better than fine, honestly. He settled into the guest room at the end of the hall, and we worked out a routine. I'd help him with his physical therapy exercises in the morning. Connie would bring him breakfast. He watched the news, read his Bible, did crossword puzzles on the tablet my daughter had set up for him. He wasn't much trouble. He never had been. I noticed the first thing in late November. My father had always been a good sleeper. Out by 9, up by 6. But I started waking up around 2 or 3 in the morning to use the bathroom and hearing sounds from his end of the hall. Not loud sounds. Just something. Movement. A voice, sometimes. I told myself it was the television. He'd probably fallen asleep with it on. But then one night I got up and the hallway was dark and quiet, and I could hear Connie's footsteps coming from the direction of his room. She came around the corner and stopped when she saw me. Just for a second. A small pause that I wasn't supposed to notice. Then she smiled and said she'd just been checking on him. Said she thought she heard him get up and wanted to make sure he was okay. I said, "Is he?" She said, "He's fine. Go back to sleep." And I did, because she was my wife. Because I trusted her. But after that I started paying attention. It happened again 3 nights later, and again after that, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. I'd wake up and Connie's side of the bed would be empty, and a few minutes later I'd hear her coming back down the hall. She always had an explanation. He needed water. She heard him cough. She thought she smelled something. I didn't say anything for a while. I told myself it was kindness. That's what I wanted it to be. But something was wrong with my father, and I couldn't pin down what. He started sleeping later in the mornings. That wasn't like him. He'd always been an early riser, said sleeping past 7 was a waste of God's daylight. Now I'd go knock on his door at 8:30, and he'd sound groggy, thick-voiced, like he was coming up from somewhere deep. He was quieter at meals. My father had opinions about everything, the weather, the news, the way young people drove. He'd always been the kind of man who could hold a dinner table just by talking. Now he'd sit and eat and not say much, and when I'd try to draw him out, he'd just nod and say, "Mm-hmm," and look out the window. I figured it was the hip. Recovery was hard. He was 81. I told myself he was tired. Then I found the bruise. It was a Wednesday. He'd just come out of the shower, and I was helping him with the sleeve of his shirt. His shoulder still gave him trouble, and I saw it on his upper arm. A bruise about the size of a silver dollar, dark purple at the center, already going yellow at the edges. I said, "Dad, what happened here?" He looked at it. Then he looked away. He said he must have bumped himself on the bathroom door frame. "When?" I said. He said he didn't remember. I let it go. I don't know why I let it go. Because he was my father, and he said it was fine, I suppose. Because admitting something might be wrong felt like opening a door I didn't know how to close. But I didn't sleep well that night. I lay there in the dark, and I thought about the bruise, and the way he'd looked away from it, and the way Connie was always up in the middle of the night, and none of it settled right in my mind. The next morning, I looked up elder abuse on my phone. That felt like betraying someone, though I couldn't have said who. I read about what it looked like. The unexplained bruising, the changes in sleep and personality, the withdrawal, the way victims often protected their abusers, especially when the abuser was a family member. I put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I didn't confront Connie. I'm not proud of that. But I'd been married to her for 38 years. I couldn't walk up to her and say what I was thinking without some kind of proof. I knew how that conversation would go. She'd be hurt and angry and I'd feel like a monster, and nothing would change except she'd know I was watching. I needed to see for myself. I ordered a small home security camera online. Nothing expensive, a decent wireless model that I could access from my phone. It arrived in 2 days. I set it up on the bookshelf in my father's room on a Friday afternoon, while he was resting and Connie was out getting groceries. I told him what I was doing. I told him I just wanted to make sure he was safe, that if he fell in the night or needed something, we'd know. He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face that I still think about. He said, "All right, son." Just that. "All right, son." I checked the footage the next morning. What I saw took the floor out from under me. Connie came in at 2:17 a.m. She didn't turn on the overhead light. She came in quietly, in her robe, and she went to his bedside and she woke him up. And she stood over him and spoke to him in a voice I'd never heard from her in 38 years of marriage. Low and flat and mean. She told him he was a burden. She told him he was ruining our retirement. She told him that if he kept making things difficult, she would make sure he ended up in a facility where nobody would visit him. My father lay there in his bed and he didn't say anything. He just looked at the ceiling. Then she took his extra pillow. He always slept with two, his back, and she put it on the chair in the corner. She said he could have it back in the morning. That was it. She left. The whole thing was maybe 4 minutes. I sat in my truck in the driveway, and I watched it twice on my phone. I couldn't go back in the house right away. I just sat there in the cold with my hands on the steering wheel, and something I'd believed about my life for 38 years was quietly coming apart. I called my daughter in Atlanta. It was early, before 7. She answered on the second ring because she always worried when I called early. I told her I needed to talk to her, and I needed her not to say anything until I was done. She didn't say anything until I was done. Then she said, "Daddy, how long?" I didn't know. That was the truth. I didn't know how long, and that was the worst part. Because if it had been happening since October, and I hadn't known, hadn't let myself know, then I had failed him. My own father. My daughter wanted to drive down that day. I asked her to give me until the weekend. I needed to think. I needed to see the footage from a few more nights to understand the full picture, and I needed to be steady when I did what I was about to do. I know some people will have a problem with that. I've heard it before. Why did I wait even 2 more days? And all I can say is that I'd been with this woman for almost 4 decades, and I owed it to myself and to the truth to be absolutely certain about what I was seeing before I burned everything down. I also made sure to check on my father myself during those nights. I slept light. I was there. The next 2 nights were enough. She came in both times. She took the pillow both times. On the second night, she was rougher about waking him, grabbed his shoulder, and that told me everything I needed to know about the bruise on his arm. My daughter drove down on Saturday morning. My son flew in from Nashville on Saturday afternoon. I hadn't told Connie they were coming. We sat down at the kitchen table, all 4 of us. I put my phone on the table and I played the footage. Connie didn't say anything for a long time after it ended. Then she said the camera was an invasion of privacy. That was the first thing she said. My daughter said, "Mom, you were hurting him." Connie said she was under a lot of stress. She said my father was demanding and ungrateful, and that I had no idea what it was like to be the one at home with him all day. She said she'd given up her routine, her peace, her life, and nobody appreciated it. I said, "Connie, you took his pillow." She didn't have an answer for that. That night my daughter stayed in my father's room. In the morning I drove Connie to her sister's house in Slidell. She had a bag packed. I'd helped her pack it the night before, and it was the strangest thing I'd ever done, standing in our bedroom, folding her blouses, knowing that this was the last time I'd be doing this in this house, in this life, with this woman. She cried in the car. I kept my eyes on the road. She asked me if this was really what I wanted. I said, "I want my father to be safe." She didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. In the weeks that followed, I took my father to his doctor and I told the doctor what had happened. He was examined carefully, They found the bruising consistent with what I'd seen on the footage. We filed a report with Adult Protective Services, and I spoke with an attorney about what options we had. My daughter helped me through all of it. She's a practical person, my daughter. She gets that from her grandfather. My father stayed in the guest room while we sorted through the legal side of things. He was quieter than usual for a while, but then the mornings started going better. He began sleeping through the night again. He started wearing his collared shirts. About 3 weeks after Connie left, he came and found me in the garage where I was doing something that didn't need doing because I needed something to do with my hands. He stood in the doorway and he looked at me and he said, "I should have told you." I said, "Dad." He said, "I know why I didn't. I was ashamed. A man my age, afraid of a woman in his own son's house. I thought you wouldn't believe it, or that if you did, it would cause problems between the two of you. I was trying to protect you from it." I had to put down the wrench I was holding. He said, "You set up that camera because you were protecting me. I should have let you do that sooner. I'm 63 years old. I haven't cried in front of my father since I was 9. I came close that afternoon in the garage. I told him there was nothing to be ashamed of. I told him what happened to him wasn't a reflection of who he was. It was a reflection of something broken in someone else. I told him this was still his home, for as long as he wanted it to be, and that nobody was ever going to make him feel like a burden in a house that I owned. He nodded. He said, "All right, son." Same words as before, different weight. Connie and I are separated now. I have an attorney. The process is what it is, and I won't lie and say it doesn't hurt, because 38 years is 38 years, and I don't think you get to just turn that off. But I also don't lie awake wondering if I did the right thing. I know I did. That part is clear. What's less clear is how I missed it for so long. How I slept in the same bed as this woman and didn't know what was happening 30 feet down the hall. I've had to sit with that. I've had to look at it honestly and ask myself what I didn't want to see and why. I think the answers is that we protect the stories we've built about our lives. The story of my marriage, of my wife's goodness, of the home I'd made. I wasn't ready to let that story be wrong. And while I was busy protecting the story, my father was lying in the dark with no pillow and nowhere to go. I don't have a tidy way to end this. My father is still here. He's doing his crossword puzzles. He called my daughter last Tuesday and talked for 40 minutes, and she called me afterward just to say that he sounded like himself again. That's the part I hold on to. If you have an elderly parent living with you or someone else, and something feels off, the sleep changes, the quietness, the way they flinch when someone comes in the room, please don't do what I did. Don't wait for the story to make sense. Go find out. Set up the camera. Make the call. Ask the question directly even when you're afraid of the answer. Because here's what I know now. My father spent weeks protecting me from the truth because he thought that's what a good father did. And I spent weeks protecting myself from the truth because I didn't have the courage yet to face it. And in the middle of all that protecting, nobody was protecting him. I'm glad that changed. I just wish it had changed sooner.